First Contact's fatal mistake. The Arcadian Empire had ruled the Andromeda Arm for 10,000 years, their crystalline ships a symbol of absolute authority among the stars. When their long-range sensors first detected Earth's primitive radio signals, they dismissed the blue planet as just another world ripe for absorption into their perfect order. First Contact Commander Vex Thor, a veteran of 100 planetary acquisitions, expected nothing more than a routine submission ceremony. The Arcadians' first mistake was believing that humanity's technological inferiority reflected a lack of potential. Their second was assuming that Earth's political divisions meant humans would never unite. But their fatal error was failing to understand that humans had spent their entire history preparing for this moment, not through deliberate planning, but through countless stories, films, and games about alien invasion. When the Arcadian ships appeared in Earth's orbit, humanity didn't panic. They had rehearsed this scenario in their minds 1,000,000 times. Commander Vex Thor stood on the bridge of the crystalline dominion, his iridescent scales reflecting the blue glow of Earth on the main viewport. His species had evolved in the rigid order of perfect crystalline structures, and they had built their empire on the same principles. Every conquest followed the same pattern. Show overwhelming force, demonstrate technological superiority, and watch as primitive species submitted to the inevitable. Curious, his science officer, Zira, noted, her crystalline appendages clicking as she analyzed the data streams. They've already detected our presence, but their response is unexpected. Instead of the usual chaos that accompanied First Contact, Earth's nations were rapidly coordinating their responses. Military satellites that had once been pointed at each other now turned outward. Communications that had been reserved for threats of war now carried messages of unity. Their information networks are fascinating, Zura continued. They're sharing data about us faster than we can track. And, sir, you should see this. She projected a hologram showing thousands of human entertainment broadcasts, all depicting alien invasions. They've been imagining this scenario for over a century. Vex Thor dismissed her concerns with a wave of his translucent hand. Fiction cannot prepare them for reality. Begin the standard protocol. The Arcadian fleet deployed their psychic dampeners, technology that had broken the will of 1,000 species before. The crystalline devices emitted waves that typically induced fear, confusion, and eventually submission in primitive nervous systems. But as the devices activated, something unprecedented occurred. Human minds, rather than buckling under the alien influence, began adapting. Their brains, incredibly plastic and resilient, started forming new neural pathways around the affected areas. What's more, they were documenting the effects, sharing symptoms, and developing countermeasures in real time. Impossible, Vex Thor muttered as reports flooded in. Human militaries were already analyzing the energy signatures of Arcadian technology. Their scientists, working with unprecedented cooperation, were developing theoretical countermeasures. Their manufacturing bases were retooling for war with efficiency that bordered on precognition. The Arcadian commander made his second critical mistake. Rather than recognizing this adaptability as a warning sign, he saw it as a challenge to his authority. Begin the demonstration, he ordered, selecting 3 major cities for devastation. It was a standard tactic. Show overwhelming force, break their will to resist. The crystalline ships moved into position, their weapons charging with the same energy that had reduced countless alien cities to ash. But in the brief minutes it took to power up their main guns, humanity showed why they were different from every species the Arcadians had encountered before. A barrage of nuclear weapons, hidden in orbital trajectories disguised as space debris, detonated in precisely calculated positions around the Arcadian fleet. The electromagnetic pulses didn't destroy the advanced ships, but they did exactly what Earth scientists had gambled they would do. The crystalline structures that made up Arcadian technology briefly refracted the energy, creating microscopic imperfections in their perfect lattices. Minor damage, the tactical officer reported dismissively. Their primitive weapons cannot harm our ships. But Vexthor, for the first time in his long career, felt something alien to his crystalline nature: doubt. The humans hadn't been trying to destroy his ships. They had been gathering data. Within hours, Earth's quantum computers were analyzing the refraction patterns from the nuclear detonations, mapping the fundamental structure of Arcadian technology. Within days, they had identified critical resonance frequencies that could shatter the seemingly invulnerable crystalline hulls. When the Arcadian ships fired on their first target, New Delhi, their weapons met a hastily constructed shield of focused sound waves that caused their energy beams to refract harmlessly into space. The humans had adapted their understanding of crystal harmonics and applied it to defensive technology in less than a week. Impossible, Vexthor whispered again, but this time with the first stirrings of fear. His perfect crystalline mind, evolved for order and predictability, couldn't process the speed at which humanity was adapting. The final blow to his confidence came when human broadcasting channels, which had been studied by the Arcadians' linguistic experts, began transmitting in perfect Arcadian crystal speak. The message was simple but terrifying in its implications. We have been preparing for this moment for generations, not through technology, but through imagination. Every alien invasion story we created was a mental exercise in survival. Every science fiction tale was a blueprint for adaptation. You believed you were discovering Earth. The truth is, Earth has been discovering you since we first looked up at the stars and asked, what if? As Vexthor watched his fleet's supposedly impenetrable defenses being systematically analyzed and countered, he realized that the Arcadian Empire had made a fundamental error in its assessment of intelligent life. They had confused technological advancement with evolutionary success. Humanity's greatest technology wasn't their weapons or their machines. It was their mind's infinite capacity to adapt, imagine, and overcome. The first battle for Earth was about to begin, and for the first time in the history of the Arcadian Empire, the crystalline commanders felt something alien growing in their perfect, ordered minds. Uncertainty. The innovation of desperation. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the underground laboratory beneath the ruins of MIT, her hands hovering over a fractured piece of Arcadian crystal salvaged from their first failed attack. The crystal hummed with an inner light, its lattice structure more complex than anything humans had ever created. But where others saw impenetrable alien technology, she saw possibility. They think in straight lines, she explained to the international team of scientists gathered around her. Their entire civilization is built on perfect order, predictable patterns. But that's not how nature works. That's not how we work. The Arcadian invasion had transformed Earth's scientific community. Gone were the days of competitive secrecy and patent disputes. Humanity's greatest minds now work together in a desperate race against extinction. Chinese quantum physicists collaborated with American nanotechnology experts. Russian materials scientists shared discoveries with Indian biotechnology researchers, all united by the need to survive. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. James Okonjo, a Nigerian specialist in biomimicry, noticed something about the way the Arcadian crystals failed under stress. "Look at this," he said, pointing to microscope footage of a damaged crystal. "The fractures don't follow mathematical patterns, they follow organic ones, like the way tree roots break apart rocks." This observation led to the first major innovation in humanity's counteroffensive. Instead of trying to match the Arcadians' perfect crystalline technology, Earth's scientists began developing what they called chaos tech, technology that mimicked the unpredictable but effective patterns found in nature. The first prototype was a defensive shield based on the structure of spider silk, not a solid barrier, but a web of energized strands that could flex and redistribute force. When an Arcadian energy beam hit it, instead of trying to block the attack, the shield absorbed and dispersed it like a natural web catching prey. But the real game changer came from studying how Earth's plants and animals had evolved to use crystalline structures. The Arcadians aren't the first to use crystal technology, Dr. Chen announced one day. holding up a piece of shell from a deep-sea mollusk. Earth's life forms have been growing crystals for millions of years. They're just not perfect crystals. This revelation led to the development of biocrystal hybrid technology. Human scientists learned to grow crystals that were deliberately imperfect, incorporating organic elements that made them more adaptable and resilient. While Arcadian technology relied on perfect structure, human technology embraced controlled chaos. The first human ships built with this new technology looked nothing like their Arcadian counterparts. Where Arcadian vessels were geometric and pristine, human ships were asymmetrical, their hulls covered in crystalline growths that seemed almost alive. They couldn't match the raw power of Arcadian weapons, but they could do something the aliens found impossible to counter. They could evolve during battle. Every hit we take, every energy beam that strikes our shields, teaches our systems something new, Dr. Chen explained to the military commanders. Our technology doesn't just resist damage, it learns from it. The Arcadians' response to these developments revealed both their greatest strength and their critical weakness. Their perfect, crystalline minds could not comprehend technology that didn't follow logical, predictable patterns. Their attempts to analyze and counter human innovations were frustrated by systems that constantly changed and adapted. Admiral Jessica Hayes, watching the first test of a biocrystal hybrid ship, understood the psychological advantage this gave humanity. "They see our technology as flawed, imperfect," she said. "They don't understand that imperfection is our strength. It's what allows us to grow, to change, to become something new." As Earth's first fleet of hybrid ships prepared for launch, Dr. Chen made one final modification to their systems. She introduced what she called quantum uncertainty matrices, crystalline structures deliberately grown with random imperfections that made them impossible to predict or analyze using Arcadian logic. They came here believing they were superior because they had mastered the art of perfect crystalline technology. She told the assembled fleet commanders, "We're going to show them that perfection is a dead end. Life, real life, thrives on imperfection, on adaptation, on change." The Arcadian Empire was about to learn that their greatest advantage, their perfect, ordered nature, had become their greatest vulnerability. They had evolved to embody crystalline perfection, but in doing so, they had lost the ability to adapt. Humanity, with its messy, chaotic, ever-changing nature, was about to demonstrate why evolution favors adaptability over perfection. As the first wave of hybrid ships rose from Earth's surface, their biocrystal hulls shimmering with unpredictable patterns, they carried with them humanity's greatest weapon, the ability to turn apparent weakness into unexpected strength. The counter-strike begins. The Arcadian fleet held position in high orbit, their crystalline ships arranged in mathematically perfect formations. Commander Vexthor watched the approaching human vessels with a mixture of confusion and contempt. The ship's asymmetrical designs offended his sense of order, their chaotic energy signatures disrupting the harmony of his tactical displays. "Their technology is an abomination," his science officer Zira reported, her crystalline appendages twitching in distress. "The crystals they're using, they're deliberately flawed, impure. It defies all logical principles of construction." What the Arcadians couldn't understand was about to destroy them. Admiral Hayes, commanding the Earth fleet from her flagship Prometheus, had developed battle strategies that deliberately exploited the aliens' rigid thinking. The human ships approached in seemingly random patterns, their movements unpredictable even to their own commanders. "They're expecting us to fight like them," Hayes transmitted to her fleet. "To follow established military doctrine. To behave logically. Let's show them why that's a mistake." The first engagement began not with a dramatic exchange of fire, but with something the Arcadians had never encountered: electronic warfare based on quantum uncertainty. Human ships broadcast signals that resonated with the Arcadian crystals at frequencies that existed in multiple states simultaneously. To the perfectly ordered minds of the alien commanders, it was like trying to solve an equation where the numbers refused to hold still. Vexthor's tactical officers struggled to track targets that seemed to exist in multiple places at once. The humans had learned to exploit the quantum properties of their hybrid crystals to create warfare that operated outside the bounds of classical physics. Each human ship projected multiple quantum shadows of itself, making it impossible for Arcadian targeting systems to lock onto any single vessel. Impossible, Vexthor muttered, watching as his perfect formation began to break apart under the strain of trying to engage an enemy that refused to follow the rules of proper combat. They're turning disorder itself into a weapon. The human fleet's first actual attack came from an unexpected direction. Below, while the Arcadians had been distracted by the quantum ghost ships, a second wave of Earth vessels had skimmed the atmosphere, using the planet's magnetic field to mask their approach. These ships carried weapons based on Dr. Chen's latest innovation, crystals grown in zero gravity that could channel and amplify Earth's magnetic field. The attack struck the Arcadian fleet like a wave of liquid lightning. The perfectly ordered crystalline hulls of their ships, designed to resist conventional energy weapons, proved catastrophically vulnerable to weapons that operated on principles of controlled chaos. Where their shields expected to encounter focused beams or explosive force, they instead faced tendrils of electromagnetic energy that wormed their way through the microscopic imperfections in their crystal lattices. They're not trying to destroy our ships, Zyra realized with horror. They're trying to change them. She was right. The human weapons weren't designed for simple destruction. Instead, they induced forced evolution in the Arcadian crystals, causing them to grow in unpredictable patterns. Perfect geometric shapes began sprouting chaotic formations, like cancer in a crystalline body. Ships that had maintained the same pristine form for centuries began to distort and transform. The psychological impact on the Arcadian crews was devastating. Their minds, evolved to think in terms of perfect order, couldn't handle watching their technology betray the very principles it was built upon. The first retreats began not out of tactical necessity, but from sheer cognitive dissonance. Admiral Hayes pressed the advantage, but not in ways the Arcadians could predict. Instead of pursuing fleeing ships, the human fleet began broadcasting a signal that contained something even more dangerous than weapons: ideas. Using the communication protocols they'd deciphered, they transmitted images and data about Earth's ecosystems, about evolution, about the power of adaptation and change. Your perfection is your weakness, the broadcasts declared. Look at your own crystals. The ones you consider flawed, the ones you discard, they're the ones capable of growth, the ones capable of becoming something new. The message struck at the heart of Arcadian society in ways physical weapons never could. Some younger members of their crews, those whose crystalline patterns hadn't fully set, began to question the fundamental principles of their civilization. The idea that imperfection might be an advantage, that chaos could be a source of strength, spread through their fleet like a virus of thought. Vexthor watched in horror as his perfect battle line dissolved into disorder. Human ships darted between his forces like schools of fish, each movement unpredictable yet somehow part of a larger pattern he couldn't grasp. His crews, trained to fight with mathematical precision, found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to thrive on uncertainty. They're not defeating us, he realized with growing dread. They're evolving us, and our own nature won't let us adapt fast enough to stop them. As the battle for Earth's orbit reached its climax, the fundamental conflict wasn't between different species or technologies. It was between two opposing philosophies: the belief in perfect, unchanging order, and the understanding that true strength comes from the ability to embrace and adapt to change. The fall of an empire. News of the battle for Earth spread through the Arcadian Empire at the speed of light, carrying with it the seeds of transformation. The quantum-encrypted transmissions that normally maintained order throughout their vast domains now carried something far more dangerous: doubt. The Crystal Throne, seat of the Empire's power for 10 millennia, faced its first real crisis. The Eternal Emperor, whose perfect crystalline form had remained unchanged for centuries, watched as reports flooded in from across his domains. It wasn't just the military defeat at Earth that threatened their society. It was the ideas that came with it. The humans have infected our young with dangerous thoughts. High crystal arches extol warned during an emergency council session. They speak of imperfection as strength, of chaos as a path to growth. Some are even deliberately introducing flaws into their personal crystal matrices. The Empire had always maintained control through perfect resonance. Every crystal, every mind, vibrating in harmony with the Emperor's will. But now that harmony was shattered by discordant frequencies, questions, doubts, desires for change. In the shipyards of the core worlds, young crystal shapers began experimenting with organic patterns in their designs. On the frontier worlds, governors reported increasing instances of wild growth, crystals allowed to develop naturally rather than being forced into perfect geometric forms. Dr. Chen, monitoring these developments from Earth, understood their significance. We didn't just show them a new way to build ships, she explained to the United Earth Council. We showed them a new way to exist. The Arcadian military, once the epitome of crystalline perfection, faced a crisis of doctrine. Young officers, influenced by their encounters with human tactics, began questioning the rigid formations and predictable strategies that had defined their warfare for millennia. Some even started incorporating controlled randomness into their training programs. Commander Vexthor, once the embodiment of Arcadian military precision, found himself leading an unlikely resistance within the Empire. His defeat at Earth had taught him something his crystalline mind had never considered. That truth could exist in paradox, that strength could emerge from weakness, that order could arise from chaos. Our perfection has become our prison, he declared to a group of fellow commanders. We stopped evolving because we believed we had reached the peak of development. The humans showed us that there is no peak. There is only constant change, constant growth. The Empire's response to this growing crisis revealed the fatal flaw in their perfect system. They could only conceive of two options: maintain absolute order or face complete dissolution. The concept of controlled adaptation, of guided evolution, was literally unthinkable to their crystalline minds. As the revolution of ideas spread, the Empire's attempt to maintain control became increasingly desperate. They tried to quarantine worlds infected with human thoughts. They attempted to purify crystals that showed signs of organic growth. But each action only served to highlight the rigidity of their thinking, pushing more of their people toward embracing change. Admiral Hayes, watching the Empire's response from Earth's new quantum observation posts, recognized the pattern. Their fighting changed the same way they fought us, she noted, with perfect, predictable responses that can't adapt to new circumstances. The collapse, when it came, followed crystal fracture patterns, starting from a single point of weakness and spreading along predetermined lines. The frontier worlds were the first to break away, their younger populations more open to new ideas. The military split between traditionalists who clung to perfect order and progressives who embraced adaptive strategies. Dr. Okonjo, studying reports from across Arcadian space, identified the crucial factor. Their society is like a perfect crystal lattice, beautiful, strong, but introduce enough disruptions to its structure, and it can only break. It cannot bend, cannot adapt, cannot evolve. The Crystal Throne's final attempt to maintain control proved to be its undoing. The Eternal Emperor attempted to force all crystals in the Empire to resonate at a single, perfect frequency, a technique that had quelled discord in the past. But this time, the imposed perfection met resistance from crystals that had begun to grow in new ways, creating interference patterns that shattered the Empire's communication networks. Worlds that had been linked by perfect crystalline harmony for millennia suddenly found themselves isolated. In the silence, new forms of organization began to emerge. Some worlds embraced complete transformation, their crystal cities blooming with organic patterns. Others maintained traditional forms but began experimenting with controlled imperfection. The humans, having won their war not through destruction but through introduction of new ideas, faced a new challenge. helping to guide the transformation of a civilization that had known only perfect order for 10,000 years. Earth became a beacon for young Arcadians seeking to understand how to balance order and chaos, perfection and growth. A new order. 5 years after the fall of the Crystal Throne, the galaxy was unrecognizable. Where once perfect crystalline structures had dominated the spaceways, now a vibrant mixture of forms flourished. The great Arcadian shipyards at Centauri Prime, once dedicated to producing identical vessels of mathematical precision, now created ships that were each unique, their crystal organic hybrid hulls growing and adapting to their crews over time. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the newly established Galactic Institute of Evolutionary Technologies, watching as human and Arcadian students worked together in labs that would have been unthinkable half a decade ago. Young Arcadians, their crystalline forms showing subtle organic influences, collaborated with human scientists to explore the boundaries between order and chaos. The true victory wasn't defeating them, she explained to a visiting delegation from Earth's government. It was showing them that change doesn't have to mean destruction. That growth can be guided, that evolution can be embraced rather than feared. The transformation hadn't been without its challenges. Pockets of traditional Arcadian society remained, their inhabitants clinging to the old ways of perfect order. But even these enclaves were changing, albeit slowly, as they observed the success of worlds that had embraced adaptive technologies. Commander Vexthor, now serving as an ambassador between the old and new orders, had undergone his own transformation. His once perfect crystalline form now showed subtle organic patterns, the result of allowing controlled imperfections into his matrix. We thought we were teaching the galaxy about perfection, he reflected during a conference at the Institute. Instead, the galaxy taught us about growth. The humans' role in this new order was unique. Rather than establishing themselves as conquerors or rulers, they became facilitators of change, guides helping others navigate the balance between order and chaos. Earth's universities became centers for studying what they called adaptive crystalline engineering, a field that combined the best aspects of both human and Arcadian approaches to technology. Admiral Hayes, now retired from military service, led diplomatic missions to worlds struggling with the transition. The key, she often said, is understanding that strength comes not from eliminating weakness, but from learning to grow through it. The Arcadians had eliminated all weakness from their society, and in doing so, they had eliminated their ability to adapt. The greatest symbol of this new philosophy could be seen in the transformed crystal throne itself. Where once a single perfect crystal had dominated the capital world of the former empire, now stood a living memorial. A vast crystal garden where structures were allowed to grow naturally, their patterns shifting and evolving over time. It served as both a reminder of the past and a beacon for the future. Dr. Okonjo, studying the garden's growth patterns, discovered something remarkable. The crystals aren't just growing randomly, he reported. They're forming new kinds of order, more complex and resilient than anything we could have designed. It's like watching evolution in action, but at a crystalline level. The impact of these changes reached far beyond technology and warfare. A new philosophy emerged, spreading across the galaxy. The idea that true perfection lay not in achieving a final, unchanging state, but in the endless process of growth and adaptation itself. Young Arcadians began to see their crystalline nature not as a mandate for rigid order, but as a foundation for infinite possibilities of growth. As Earth prepared to host the first Galactic Congress of Adaptive Civilizations, Dr. Chen reflected on how far they had come. "We didn't just survive first contact," she told her students. "We helped create something entirely new." The Arcadians taught us about the power of order and precision, while we taught them about the strength found in adaptation and change. The galaxy watched as representatives from 100 worlds gathered on Earth, each bringing their own unique blend of order and chaos, structure and adaptation. Former enemies now worked together, their differences becoming sources of strength rather than conflict. The human victory had not led to dominance, but to synthesis, a new way of existing that celebrated both stability and change. And in the vast crystal garden that had once been the seat of perfect order, new forms continued to grow, each imperfection creating possibilities that pure perfection never could have imagined. It stood as a living testament to humanity's greatest lesson to the galaxy, that true strength lies not in achieving perfection, but in never-ending growth and adaptation. The story of humanity's first contact with the Arcadian Empire became more than just a tale of victory and war. It became a parable about the nature of progress itself, about how the collision of opposing philosophies could lead not to destruction, but to transcendence. In the end, humanity's greatest achievement wasn't defeating an empire, but helping to birth a new way of thinking that would reshape the galaxy for millennia to come.